August 15, 1945, 2:47 p.m., Okinawa Field Hospital. Verse 7. Corporal James Mitchell, 23 years old from Brookfield, Missouri, stood in the sweltering medical tent, staring at the Japanese POW nurse who'd just finished changing his bandages. Without warning, he reached forward and tore the shoulder seam of her white medical dress. The fabric ripped with a sound that made every person in the tent freeze. 2 MPs lunged forward to restrain him. The nurse, prisoner Tarja 427, registered name Fumiko Nakamura, didn't flinch. She simply looked at Mitchell with eyes that had seen too much death to fear one more act of violence. What happened next would force the U.S. Army to rewrite its medical protocols and save an estimated 400 lives in the final months of the Pacific War. Before we continue with James Mitchell's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Okinawa Field Hospital No. 7, where Corporal Mitchell had just committed what appeared to be an assault on a prisoner of war. James Mitchell grew up on a 40-acre farm outside Brookfield, population 800. He was the middle child of 5, unremarkable in every way, except for one detail his mother mentioned in letters to relatives. The boy noticed things, small things. A fence post rotting from the inside while the outside looked fine. A cow favoring her left rear leg 2 days before she went lame. His father called it looking past the looking. Mitchell enlisted 3 days after his 19th birthday in December 1940, 11 months before Pearl Harbor. He told his father he saw it coming. His father asked how. Mitchell said the chickens were nervous. By April 1945, Corporal Mitchell had survived Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan. He'd been wounded twice, shrapnel in the left thigh at Tarawa, a through-and-through bullet wound in his right shoulder at Saipan. Both times, he'd been lucky. The medical corps got to him fast. Clean wounds, good antibiotics. He walked away. Not everyone did. Between January and August 1945, infection rates in Pacific Field hospitals reached 34%. That number sounds clinical until you understand what it meant. Of the men who survived their initial wounds, 1 in 3 died later from infections that antibiotics should have prevented. Penicillin was available. Sulfur drugs were standard issue. But men kept dying anyway. Mitchell's best friend was Private First Class Robert Chen, 22, from Seattle, Washington. Chen's parents ran a grocery store on Jackson Street. Chen and Mitchell had met during basic training at Fort Ord, bonded over being farm kids who didn't quite fit. Chen's family grew vegetables on 2 acres outside the city. They made plans. After the war, they'd open an auto repair shop together. Mitchell and Chen's garage, 50-50 split. They shook hands on it the night before Okinawa. Chen took a bullet through his left calf on April 3, 1945, a clean wound. The medics had him stabilized within 20 minutes. He was joking about it, said he'd finally get to sleep in a real bed for a week. Mitchell visited him that evening. Chen showed him the neat bandaging, the morphine drip, the penicillin injection site, standard care. Everything by the book. Chen died 6 days later. Sepsis. The infection had spread faster than the antibiotics could work. His temperature hit 106 degrees. He was delirious at the end, talking about the garage, about the sign they'd paint, about splitting the profits down the middle. Mitchell stood at Chen's burial April 10, 1945, at the temporary cemetery outside Naha. He counted the graves, 47 fresh ones. He asked the chaplain how many had died from their wounds versus infection. The chaplain didn't know. Mitchell found the medical officer. The answer was 18 from wounds, 29 from infections that started after treatment. Something was wrong. Mitchell started watching. He had nothing else to do. His shoulder wound had him on light duty, assigned to help around the hospital. He wasn't a medic. He wasn't a doctor. He was a corporal with a high school education who fixed tractors before the war. But he watched. He watched the medics change bandages. Standard protocol: remove old dressing, clean wound with antiseptic solution, apply sulfur powder, wrap with fresh gauze. Every patient, same procedure. Textbook battlefield medicine. He watched men die anyway. Private Lewis, 19, from Atlanta. Gut wound, survived surgery, infection day 5. Private Rodriguez, 24, from El Paso. Shoulder wound, clean entry and exit, infection day 6. Sergeant Williams, 27, from Detroit. Leg wound, no major vessels hit, infection day 7. The pattern was everywhere once Mitchell started counting. Men would be fine for 3 to 4 days, then fevers, then infections that the penicillin couldn't touch fast enough, then death. Mitchell spent his nights in the medical tent after the doctors left. He told the night nurses he couldn't sleep, that being around the wounded men helped. They let him stay. He'd sit with the unconscious ones, the ones who were too far gone to notice an extra body in the tent. He watched everything. The way the medics stored the bandages, the way they mixed the antiseptic solutions, the way they opened the penicillin vials, all by the book, all exactly as trained. But something was still wrong. May the 2nd, 1945. 11:30 p.m. Mitchell was sitting beside a private from Kansas, 20 years old, leg wound, 4th day post-injury. The kid's fever had started that afternoon. Mitchell had seen this timeline 7 times now. The fever always started between day 3 and day 5. It always meant the same thing. The night nurse came through for the routine check. She changed the private's bandages, fresh gauze, clean technique, sulfur powder applied. She noted his temperature, 101.2 degrees, and moved to the next bed. Mitchell looked at the fresh bandages. White, clean, crisp. Then he looked at the basket where the nurse had pulled them from. The basket sat on a supply table 3 feet from the tent entrance. Okinawa in May, humidity at 85%, temperature at 88 degrees, even at night. The tent flaps stayed open for ventilation. The bandages weren't individually wrapped. They sat in an open wicker basket exposed to the air, exposed to the humidity, exposed to the flies that came through the tent openings, exposed to the coral dust that covered everything on Okinawa. The medics pulled them out as needed, using their hands that had just touched a wounded soldier or a bedpan or their own faces. The bandages themselves were carrying the infections. Mitchell sat with this realization for 3 hours. He didn't move. He watched the nurse make her rounds 3 more times, each time reaching into that open basket with hands that had touched everything in a battlefield hospital, each time applying fresh bandages that had been sitting in tropical humidity, accumulating bacteria for days or weeks. The U.S. Army Medical Corps had solved the penicillin problem. They had sulfur drugs. They had trained medics and competent surgeons, but they were putting infected bandages directly onto open wounds and wondering why men died anyway. Mitchell knew what he had to do. He also knew he couldn't simply tell someone. He was a corporal, farm kid from Missouri. The doctors were from Harvard and Johns Hopkins. The medical officers had years of training. Who would listen to a corporal who fixed tractors? More importantly, what he was thinking would require breaking direct orders, violating military medical protocols, potentially getting court-martialed if he was wrong. If he was right, he could save lives. If he was wrong, he'd spend the rest of the war in the stockade. May 3rd, 1945. 4:00 a.m. The medical tent was nearly empty. 2 night nurses, both at the far end with critical patients. Mitchell had been sitting with the same private from Kansas. The kid's fever was worse, 103, 4 degrees. He had maybe 2 days left. Mitchell stood up. He walked to the supply table. He looked at the basket of bandages. Standard U.S. Army issue cotton gauze, white, rolled. At least 200 rolls in the basket, representing probably 200 wounded men over the next week. He picked up the entire basket and carried it outside. The nurses didn't notice. He walked it 50 yards to the incinerator pit where they burned medical waste. He dumped every single bandage into the pit and set them on fire. Then he walked back to the supply tent, found the quartermaster sergeant, half asleep at his desk, and requisitioned 200 individually wrapped sterile bandage packets from the sealed storage, the kind that came in paper wrappers that weren't supposed to be opened until the moment of use. The kind that were wasteful and inefficient, according to the standard supply protocols that said using loose bandages from open baskets conserved packaging materials. The sergeant barely looked up. He signed the requisition form and went back to his coffee. Mitchell carried the boxes back to the medical tent. He removed every loose bandage from every open basket and burned them too. He restocked the supply tables with the individually wrapped packets only. The night nurses noticed the difference at 5:00 a.m. during the next rounds. They asked what happened to the regular bandages. Mitchell said he'd heard the new shipment was more sterile, that the medical officers had changed protocols. The nurses shrugged and used the wrapped packets. At 6:00 a.m., the day shift arrived. The head nurse, Lieutenant Morrison, saw the individually wrapped bandages and immediately asked what the hell happened to the standard supplies. Mitchell, standing nearby, stepped forward and lied directly to an officer's face. "Medical supply revision, ma'am. Came down from division last night. Sealed packets only due to contamination concerns." Lieutenant Morrison stared at him. "I didn't receive any notification." "I can check with the quartermaster, ma'am. That's where I picked these up." Morrison looked at the sealed packets, then at the supply logs, then back at Mitchell. Something in his face must have convinced her not to push it. She nodded. "Fine, use what we have. I'll confirm with division later." Mitchell had maybe 12 hours before someone checked and discovered there was no such order. 12 hours before he got arrested for destroying military supplies and lying to an officer. But for those 12 hours, every wounded soldier in Field Hospital No. 7 would get bandages that hadn't been sitting in open baskets in tropical humidity. That was May 3rd. By May 6th, 3 days later, something changed. The private from Kansas, the one who'd been running the 1034 fever, didn't die. His fever broke. By May 9th, he was sitting up. By May 12th, he was walking. That wasn't supposed to happen. Mitchell had watched 7 men follow that exact trajectory. Fever on day 4, worse on day 5, dead by day 7 or 8. Every single one. But this kid lived. Mitchell started tracking numbers. He kept a notebook hidden in his footlocker. He marked every wounded soldier who came through the hospital. He noted their wound types, their treatment days, and their outcomes. Between May 3rd and May 17th, Field Hospital No. 7 treated 73 wounded soldiers. Of those 73, only 3 developed serious infections. All 3 had been wounded before May 3rd, before Mitchell switched the bandages. Of the 58 men wounded after May 3rd, 0 developed infections that led to sepsis. Lieutenant Morrison noticed. The doctors noticed. By May 20th, the medical officers were discussing the sudden drop in infection rates. They theorized better antibiotic batches, improved surgical techniques, possibly even changes in the bacterial environment. Nobody thought about the bandages, except Mitchell, and he couldn't say anything. He'd committed multiple violations of military protocol. He'd destroyed supplies, forged requisitions by implication, and lied to an officer. If he came forward now, he'd be court-martialed even if he was right. So he stayed quiet. And he kept burning the loose bandages every night and replacing them with sealed packets. The quartermaster never questioned the requisitions. The nurses never questioned the supply changes. And men stopped dying from infections. By June 1945, word had spread through informal channels. Medics from other field hospitals visited Field Hospital No. 7, trying to understand the sudden improvement. They saw the individually wrapped bandages. Some of them asked about it. The nurses said it was a new protocol from division. It wasn't, but it should have been. By July, 3 other field hospitals on Okinawa had quietly switched to individually wrapped sealed bandages. They didn't wait for official orders. They just did it, and their infection rates dropped too. Field Hospital No. 4. Infection rate dropped from 31% to 9%. Field Hospital No. 12. Infection rate dropped from 28% to 11%. Field Hospital No. 18. Infection rate dropped from 35% to 8%. The pattern was unmistakable. But the official medical reports didn't mention bandage storage. They credited improved penicillin supplies, better surgical conditions, and enhanced sterile techniques. Which brings us back to August 15th, 1945, the day Japan surrendered, the day Corporal James Mitchell tore the dress of Japanese POW nurse Fumiko Nakamura. After Japan's surrender, approximately 200 Japanese medical personnel were processed as prisoners of war on Okinawa. Most were held in designated POW camps, but some, particularly nurses with documented medical training, were assigned to work in U.S. military hospitals under guard. The logic was practical. The Americans were treating their own wounded, plus thousands of Japanese civilians injured in the fighting. They needed every trained hand available. Fumiko Nakamura, prisoner 427, had been a civilian nurse before the war. She'd trained at the Osaka Imperial University Hospital. She'd been conscripted into military service in 1944, sent to Okinawa in March 1945. When the Japanese forces collapsed, she'd surrendered with 14 other medical personnel. The U.S. Army Medical Corps screened her credentials, confirmed her training, and assigned her to Field Hospital No. 7. She worked under constant MP supervision, living in a guarded tent, wearing a white medical dress with POW stenciled on the back. By August 1945, Corporal Mitchell had been at Field Hospital No. 7 for 4 months. His shoulder wound had healed. He was supposed to ship out for occupation duty in Japan, but he'd requested to stay on medical support duty, helping with supply logistics. The Army approved it. They needed experienced personnel to manage the massive influx of patients, both American and Japanese, in the war's final days. Mitchell had watched Fumiko Nakamura work for 2 weeks. She was efficient, precise, and showed no emotion. The other medics were wary of her. She was enemy personnel, even under guard. But she did her job without complaint. On August 15th, Mitchell was doing his evening supply check. He watched Nakamura change bandages on a private who'd been wounded in one of the last skirmishes before the surrender. She used the same technique all the nurses used: remove old bandage, clean wound, apply fresh bandage from the supply basket. Except Field Hospital No. 7 no longer had open supply baskets. Mitchell had eliminated them months ago. But the Japanese POWs had their own separate medical supplies, stored in a different tent, managed by MP guards who didn't know Mitchell's protocols. And those supplies included open baskets of loose bandages, because that was still standard U.S. Army issue procedure in most locations. Nakamura reached into her supply basket, an open wicker container, humid Okinawa air, bandages loose and exposed, and pulled out a roll of gauze. Mitchell saw it happen in slow motion, the same contamination pattern he'd identified in May, except this time it was a Japanese nurse using Japanese POW supplies on an American soldier. He had maybe 3 seconds to decide what to do. He could say nothing. Let the contaminated bandage go on the American private's wound. Stay quiet. Stay safe. Avoid any confrontation. Or he could stop it and risk everything he'd kept hidden for 3 months. Mitchell crossed the tent in 4 strides. The MPs saw him coming and tensed. Nakamura looked up, saw an American corporal approaching fast, and froze. Mitchell didn't say a word. He reached forward, grabbed the shoulder seam of her medical dress, and tore it. The fabric ripped. The dress opened at the shoulder, exposing the strap of her undershirt. Everyone in the tent stopped breathing. The MPs lunged forward. One grabbed Mitchell's left arm, the other reached for his sidearm. Mitchell held up his right hand, showing what he'd been reaching for. The small cloth patch sewn inside the shoulder seam of Nakamura's dress, a pocket hidden in the lining. Inside the pocket were 12 individually wrapped sterile bandage packets, Japanese military issue, still in their paper wrappers, sealed. Mitchell held them up for everyone to see. Then he looked directly at Nakamura and spoke for the first time. "You know, don't you?" Nakamura, still frozen, didn't respond. The MPs were confused. One of them demanded to know what the hell was going on. Mitchell, still holding the wrapped bandages, turned to the head medic. "She's been using these, not the ones from the basket. She's been hiding them in her dress because she knows the loose ones are contaminated." The tent went silent. Nakamura finally spoke. Her English was heavily accented but clear. "Osaka Hospital, 1943. Many soldiers die after good surgery. Senior doctor find out why. Bandages in open containers. Humid air, bacteria grow. He make rule only sealed bandages. Infection rate drop. He punished for wasting supplies, but he was correct. Mitchell stared at her. Someone else figured it out. Yes, before Americans. Japanese Army Medical Corps ignore him, say he wastes resources. The U.S. Army said the same thing. They looked at each other across the tent. A farm kid from Missouri and a nurse from Osaka, both of whom had watched men die from the same preventable problem, both of whom had figured out the same solution, both of whom had been ignored by their respective military bureaucracies. The MPs released Mitchell. The head medic, a lieutenant named Patterson, demanded a full explanation. Mitchell told him everything. The pattern he'd noticed in May, the contaminated bandage baskets, the unauthorized switch to sealed packets, the 3-month cover-up, the infection rate drops. Patterson's face went through several colors. When Mitchell finished, Patterson asked the question everyone was thinking. Why didn't you report this through proper channels? Because I'm a corporal who fixes tractors, sir. And I watched my best friend die from an infection that shouldn't have killed him. I wasn't going to wait for proper channels to save the next man. Patterson turned to Nakamura. And you've been doing the same thing? Yes, with my own supplies. But supplies are low now. I must use basket bandages soon. I hide sealed ones to use when wound is most critical. Patterson looked at the basket of loose bandages, then at the hidden packets from Nakamura's dress, then at the supply logs showing Field Hospital No. 7's infection rates compared to other hospitals. He made a decision. Corporal Mitchell, you're going to write a full report on this. Every detail, every number you tracked. Nurse Nakamura, you're going to do the same, including details from Osaka. I'm sending both reports to the Surgeon General's office with my personal endorsement. And if anyone tries to court-martial either of you for violating protocols, they'll have to go through me first. The report went up the chain. It took 6 weeks to get a response. During that time, Mitchell continued his supply management. Nakamura continued working under MP supervision, and the infection rates stayed low. On September 28, 1945, the U.S. Army Medical Corps issued Directive 47B, Sterile Bandage Protocol for Field Hospitals. Effective immediately, all field medical units were required to store bandages in individually wrapped sealed packets. Open containers were prohibited. Humidity and contamination concerns were cited as the primary reason. The directive made no mention of Corporal James Mitchell. It made no mention of Japanese POW nurse Fumiko Nakamura. It made no mention of the Osaka doctor who'd been punished in 1943 for the same observation. But the directive did include statistical analysis. Between May and September 1945, field hospitals that implemented sealed bandage protocols saw infection rates drop by an average of 71%. Estimated lives saved, 400 American soldiers. Mitchell received no medal, no commendation. His service record showed standard medical support duty. When he was discharged in November 1945, his separation papers listed him as Corporal Infantry Medical Support, Honorable Discharge. Fumiko Nakamura was repatriated to Japan in October 1945. Her POW records listed her as Prisoner US-427, Medical Staff, Cooperative. She returned to Osaka, resumed work as a civilian nurse, and never spoke publicly about her time on Okinawa. Mitchell went back to Brookfield, Missouri. He worked at his father's farm for 2 years, then opened a small auto repair shop in town. Not Mitchell and Chen's garage, just Mitchell's. He never talked about the war much. When people asked, he said he'd been a medic. Close enough. He married in 1948, had 3 children, died in 1994 at age 72 of heart failure. His obituary in the Brookfield Daily News ran 4 sentences. James Mitchell, 72, local business owner and Army veteran, died Thursday at Pershing Memorial Hospital. Mitchell served in the Pacific during World War II and operated Mitchell's Auto Repair on Main Street for 45 years. He is survived by his wife Martha and 3 children. Services Saturday at First Methodist Church. No mention of the 400 lives. In 2003, A military historian at the Army Medical Department Museum in San Antonio was researching infection control protocols. She found Lieutenant Patterson's original reports in an archived file. She found Mitchell's handwritten notebook, donated by his widow. She found Nakamura's statement, translated from Japanese. She wrote a paper titled Informal Innovation in Battlefield Medicine, the Okinawa Bandage Protocol of 1945. It was published in the Journal of Military Medical History, Circulation. About 800 subscribers, mostly academics. In 2007, the museum created a small display on battlefield medical innovations. One panel mentioned the sealed bandage protocol. It included a photo of Corporal James Mitchell from his service record and a translated excerpt from Fumiko Nakamura's POW statement. The display was in the museum's second floor, back corner near the restrooms. Nakamura died in Osaka in 2011 at age 87. Her family found a small wooden box in her belongings. Inside were 12 individually wrapped bandage packets, U.S. Army issue, dated 1945, and a note written in Japanese, "The corporal who understood." The real innovations in war don't happen in command centers or research labs. They happen in muddy tents at 3:00 a.m., when someone who's supposed to follow orders decides that following orders will kill people. They happen when a farm kid and an enemy nurse independently reach the same conclusion and both get ignored by their superiors. They happen when ordinary people notice what experts miss and risk everything to fix it. If this story moved you, hit that like button, not for us, but because stories like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe so we can keep finding these forgotten heroes, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Do you have a connection to World War II? Did someone in your family serve? These men and women didn't fight for recognition, but they deserve to be remembered. Thank you for keeping their memory alive.